The night was cold in Cedarwood, Pennsylvania, but the events that would unfold in the quiet town would be even colder. A beloved local businessman, John Harris, was found dead in his living room under mysterious circumstances. His wife, Emily Harris, was the one who discovered his lifeless body. She called 911 in a state of complete shock, but there was no sign of forced entry, no apparent struggle, and no clear cause of death. The question that lingered in the air was, what really happened to John Harris? Emily, despite her frantic phone call, appeared oddly composed. Her voice quivered with distress, but her demeanor suggested something was off. The house was immaculate, the scene almost too perfect, like a carefully constructed stage. The only problem? The body of John Harris lay motionless, a beloved figure in Cedarwood, a town where everyone knew everyone, lying dead on his own couch. The detectives assigned to the case, Olivia Davis and Lucas Parker, quickly realized that this wasn't as simple as it seemed. Cedarwood was a small town with a close-knit community. The locals trusted each other, but the death of John Harris was raising suspicions. His sudden passing seemed too perfect, too clean. It didn't fit the profile of a natural death. Emily claimed her husband had been complaining of feeling unwell before he passed, but her story began to raise more questions than answers. The detectives started their investigation by interviewing those closest to John and Emily. What they uncovered stunned them. The Harris family seemed perfect on the outside, a successful business, a beautiful home, and 2 children who were away at college. But as they delved deeper into their personal lives, cracks began to show. John, it turned out, had been struggling with his marriage. Emily, his wife of nearly 20 years, had been distant for a while. They had been living in a routine, devoid of love, and filled with tension. Friends described John as a hard-working, generous man, but someone who was emotionally distant, often absorbed in his work. Was there something more to this marriage than just the surface-level appearances? The detectives began to look closer at Emily, especially after they learned about her friendship with Ryan Cooper, a charming colleague she had been spending a lot of time with. At first, Emily denied it, insisting that Ryan was just a close friend, but the whispers of Cedarwood told a different story. There were rumors, whispers of an affair, of stolen moments in quiet corners of the town. Olivia and Lucas began to wonder, was Emily truly mourning her husband, or was there something else at play? Emily's story didn't add up. She claimed that after dinner, John had gone to rest in the living room, but the next time she checked, he was unresponsive. The inconsistencies began to pile up. She seemed too calm for someone who had just discovered their spouse dead. And her reaction, or lack of it, only made the investigators more suspicious. The detectives soon uncovered a tangled web of deceit. A closer look at John's financials revealed troubling signs. Large sums of money were transferred from his accounts shortly before his death, and there was a potential connection to an unknown beneficiary. Was this a case of financial motives, or was it about something deeper? As the investigation progressed, it became clearer that John's death was far from a simple tragedy. Emily's demeanor seemed to shift, from distress to coldness, especially when questioned about her marriage. She admitted that things hadn't been going well, but she insisted that she still loved John. However, the more Emily spoke, the more the detectives began to question her sincerity. Was she truly heartbroken, or was she hiding something far darker? The twist came when the detectives discovered a crucial piece of evidence: Emily and Ryan were having an affair. This revelation turned the investigation on its head. The perfect family, the spotless reputation of the Harris household, had been shattered. Was this a crime of passion, or was there something more sinister behind John's death? The affair between Emily and Ryan was not just an emotional betrayal, it was a catalyst for murder. As the detectives dug deeper, they found text messages, phone calls, and secret meetings between the two. The affair wasn't just about love, it was about a desire to escape, a plan to build a new life together. But at what cost? Emily's motives started to become clearer. She had been feeling trapped in a marriage that no longer brought her happiness. John had become distant, absorbed in his business, and seemingly indifferent to her needs. She sought comfort in Ryan, who offered her the attention and emotional connection she was craving. But what started as an affair turned into a much darker desire, a plan to free herself from a marriage she saw as a burden. Emily's feelings of abandonment and frustration transformed into something far more dangerous. Ryan, on the other hand, seemed like a man caught in the web of his own desires. He was charming and persuasive, but he had his own demons. As Emily grew more desperate to be with him, Ryan's motivations shifted from love to greed. The two of them had been planning a life together, but it was a life built on deceit, betrayal, and, ultimately, murder. As the detectives closed in on the truth, the tension reached a breaking point. Emily and Ryan were brought in for questioning. The room was charged with emotion. The once confident, composed Emily was now crumbling under the weight of her lies. Her guilt was undeniable. The story she had been telling the detectives began to unravel. Ryan, too, cracked under pressure, revealing details that pointed directly to Emily as the mastermind behind John's death. The investigation was drawing to a close, but the emotional toll was only beginning. Emily was no longer just a grieving wife, she was a woman consumed by her own actions. The affair, the lies, the murder, all of it had led her down a path of no return. As the detectives pieced together the final moments of John's life, they knew they were close to the truth. But the question remained, what drove Emily to murder her husband? Was it the affair? The financial gain? Or was it the culmination of years of frustration and betrayal that finally boiled over? The twist? Emily was no longer just a suspect, she was the perpetrator. And Ryan, despite his attempts to absolve himself, had been an accomplice all along. The truth was dark, and the consequences were even darker. The investigation into John Harris's death had just begun, and already, everything seemed to be spiraling out of control. As detectives Olivia Davis and Lucas Parker began to dig deeper into John and Emily Harris's past, they soon uncovered a side of their relationship that had been carefully hidden beneath the surface. On the outside, John was the picture of success. A well-respected businessman in Cedarwood, Pennsylvania, his hardware store had been a cornerstone of the town for years. He was generous, well-liked, and the kind of man everyone trusted. But behind closed doors, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. The detectives soon learned that, despite the outward appearances, John and Emily had been living in a marriage that had long since lost its spark. Their relationship was built on years of routine and, increasingly, emotional distance. According to their friends and neighbors, the couple had been through a rough patch for quite some time. The passion had faded, and in its place, there was silence, resentment, and frequent arguments. John was often consumed by his work, and Emily, once a vibrant and outgoing woman, felt neglected and trapped in a marriage that seemed to be crumbling before her eyes. The more Olivia and Lucas dug into the couple's past, the more unsettling details emerged. John's professional success had come at a personal cost. Emily had become increasingly lonely, isolated in her own home, and frustrated with her stagnant marriage. There were whispers that she had tried to rekindle their love, but John was always too focused on the business. He was a good provider, but as their friends had noted, he had become emotionally unavailable. Emily had tried to connect with him in any way she could, but nothing seemed to work. As the detectives started to piece together the timeline leading up to John's death, one name began to pop up again and again: Ryan Cooper. Ryan was a colleague of Emily's from her job at a local real estate firm. On the surface, he seemed like just another work acquaintance. But as Olivia and Lucas investigated further, they discovered something far more troubling: Ryan and Emily had been spending an unusual amount of time together. Initially, Emily had denied any suggestion of a relationship beyond friendship. She insisted that Ryan was nothing more than a coworker she'd been leaning on during a difficult time. But as the investigation continued, the detectives uncovered phone records, text messages, and even surveillance footage that painted a different picture. Ryan and Emily had been secretly meeting outside of work, sharing intimate moments that went far beyond professional boundaries. What started as a seemingly innocent friendship had, over time, evolved into a full-blown affair. The detectives were shocked by how deeply this affair had impacted Emily. She was not only emotionally involved with Ryan, but their relationship had become a refuge from the turmoil she had been living with in her marriage to John. Ryan offered her the attention and affection she had been craving, and he became the escape she needed from her loveless marriage. Emily's affair with Ryan Cooper was no longer just a personal matter, it was now at the center of the investigation into John's death. The affair, the secret meetings, the lies, everything was adding up. But why would Emily, who had seemingly everything to lose, take such drastic steps? Why would she risk her marriage, her family, and everything she had for someone like Ryan? The detectives began to look more closely at Ryan, too. Who was this man that had become so entwined in the Harris family's life? Ryan was known around town as charming and charismatic. He had a reputation as a ladies' man, someone who knew how to win people over. But as Olivia and Lucas continued their interviews, they discovered that Ryan wasn't exactly who he appeared to be. Beneath his charming exterior, there were signs of instability. His financial situation was shaky, and he had a history of failed business ventures. More troubling were the rumors of his connections to questionable people, individuals who had nothing to lose and might be willing to go to extreme lengths to get what they wanted. Ryan's relationship with Emily wasn't just about love. As Olivia and Lucas dug deeper, they began to uncover clues that suggested Ryan's involvement in the affair might have had more to do with his own personal gain than with his feelings for Emily. He was facing financial ruin, and Emily, who had access to John's wealth and assets, might just be his ticket out. The detectives began to wonder if Ryan's motives were rooted in something far darker than just love. Could he have been using Emily as a means to an end? As the investigation into the affair continued, it became clear that financial motives were a major factor in John's death. Emily had long resented the fact that John had more control over their finances, and it seemed that she and Ryan were planning a life together, one that didn't involve John. The more the detectives uncovered, the more it became clear that Emily might have seen John not just as a husband, but as an obstacle. She had everything to gain by freeing herself from a marriage that had long since lost its passion. But was she willing to go as far as murder to secure her future? The tension in Cedarwood was palpable. The more Emily tried to hide the truth, the more the detectives unraveled her carefully constructed facade. Her cold demeanor during the investigation, the inconsistencies in her story, and the mounting evidence of her affair with Ryan all pointed toward one painful conclusion: Emily Harris was hiding something. But what was she hiding? Was she just a woman caught in a loveless marriage, or had she crossed a line that couldn't be undone? In the days leading up to John's autopsy results, the investigation took a more urgent turn. Emily's relationship with Ryan was no longer just an affair, it was a key piece of the puzzle. The affair had given Emily a way out of her stagnant marriage, but it had also turned her life into something she no longer recognized. Was she guilty of murder, or was she just a woman caught in a web of emotional turmoil and deception? The truth was slowly coming to light, but the deeper Olivia and Lucas dug, the more disturbing the details became. Emily's motives, once seen as a simple case of infidelity, were starting to look much more complex. With each passing day, it became clearer that her emotions, her desperation, frustration, and bitterness, had led her down a dark path, one that had ultimately ended in John Harris's tragic death. The detectives were closing in. And in Cedarwood, the perfect family's secret was on the verge of being exposed. The investigation was reaching a boiling point. After uncovering the affair between Emily Harris and Ryan Cooper, detectives Olivia Davis and Lucas Parker knew they were getting closer to the truth. But the deeper they dug into the tangled web of lies, deceit, and betrayal, the more complicated things became. What started as a seemingly simple case of a cheating wife had turned into a full-blown murder investigation, and every new discovery added another layer of complexity to the story. As the detectives continued their inquiry into John Harris's death, a chilling realization began to form. Emily and Ryan were not just having an affair, they were plotting something much darker. It wasn't just about love or passion, it was about money. And not just any money. The kind of money that could change lives. Emily's financial motives were starting to come into sharper focus. In the weeks leading up to John's death, there had been a significant transfer of funds, money that John had transferred to an unknown account just days before he died. The detectives couldn't ignore the possibility that Emily had been planning to inherit John's wealth. But the more they looked into the accounts, the more troubling things got. The mystery deepened when a thorough search of John's business dealings revealed that he had been planning a significant transfer of assets to charity. He had started a large donation campaign just a few weeks before his death, one that would have left Emily with nothing but the memories of a marriage gone wrong. To the detectives, it was starting to seem like Emily wasn't just trying to escape her marriage, she was trying to escape with John's money. Ryan's role was equally suspicious. His financial situation was crumbling. Several interviews with his colleagues revealed that he was struggling with massive debts. There were even rumors that he had been involved in some shady business dealings in the past, though no one could confirm any of it. But there was one thing the detectives could confirm: Ryan stood to gain a lot if Emily were free to claim John's wealth, and he was desperate to change his life. With their suspicions mounting, Olivia and Lucas dug even deeper into Ryan's background. They pulled up old business records, credit histories, and even searched through his past relationships. What they uncovered made their stomachs turn. Ryan had been involved in multiple failed ventures in the past, each one leaving a trail of debts and financial ruin. But what truly stood out was a life insurance policy Ryan had taken out on Emily just months before John's death. If John had died, Ryan would stand to benefit from that policy as well. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. It wasn't just the affair that tied Emily and Ryan together, it was greed, plain and simple. The detectives confronted Emily with these findings. She was cold and distant when they presented her with the evidence. She denied everything, clinging to her original story that John had died from natural causes. But as Olivia and Lucas continued to press her, her composure began to crack. The inconsistencies in her story became glaringly obvious, and soon, Emily realized she could no longer maintain the lie. The pressure was too much, and her facade began to slip away. It was then that Emily's reaction changed completely. Instead of trying to deny the truth, she shifted tactics. She became defensive, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. Emily began to accuse the detectives of framing her, claiming that they were out to ruin her life. But as they kept digging into her statements, it was clear that the cracks in her story were becoming impossible to cover up. Ryan's alibi was another point of contention. Emily had claimed that Ryan had been at his apartment the night John died, but when the detectives verified his story, they found inconsistencies in his timeline. He had told them he had been at home all night, but the evidence pointed in a different direction. Video footage from a nearby security camera showed Ryan leaving his apartment late that evening, just hours before John was found dead. The footage didn't lie, it showed Ryan entering the Harris household around the time John's life was slipping away. The detectives were piecing the final parts of the puzzle together, and Emily's role in her husband's death was becoming clearer. The affair, the money, the lies, they were all tied to one tragic moment. But as Olivia and Lucas began to close in on Emily, a new twist emerged. The toxicology report confirmed that John had been poisoned with a rare substance. But it wasn't just any poison, it was a chemical compound that was extremely difficult to obtain without specialized knowledge. Emily's background didn't fit the profile of someone who would have access to such a substance. But Ryan, with his history in chemical engineering, might have. Could he have been the one to administer the poison, using Emily as his unwitting accomplice? Or was Emily more involved than she was letting on? Olivia and Lucas were now focused on Emily's possible role as the mastermind behind John's murder. They knew that they needed more evidence to link her to the poison directly. As they continued to analyze the evidence, they came across a crucial piece of information, an email that Emily had sent to Ryan just days before John's death. In the email, she mentioned a plan to take care of everything, referring to John's unfortunate health issues. She had never specifically mentioned murder, but the context was impossible to ignore. The timeline was coming together, and the final pieces were falling into place. Emily and Ryan had planned this for months, possibly longer. They had manipulated John, used him, and ultimately killed him for financial gain. The question was no longer about whether Emily was involved, it was how far she had gone to ensure her freedom. The moment of truth was near. Olivia and Lucas knew they were on the brink of cracking the case wide open. Emily and Ryan's involvement in John's death was about to be exposed, but as the truth came closer to the surface, the detectives knew this was only the beginning of a much larger story. The tangled web of lies, deceit, and greed had woven a tragedy that Cedarwood would never forget. As Emily sat in the interrogation room, staring blankly at the detectives, she realized that her world was collapsing. There was no escape. The truth was out, and justice was closing in. The facade of a perfect marriage, a perfect life, was gone. All that remained was the haunting reality of her actions, and the consequences that would follow. The truth about John Harris's death was starting to unravel in the most chilling way possible. After weeks of investigation, the detectives, Olivia Davis and Lucas Parker, had uncovered a complex web of lies, betrayal, and financial greed. The affair between Emily Harris and Ryan Cooper was no longer the focal point of the investigation. Now, it was the deadly plot they had hatched together that demanded attention. The death of John Harris had been no accident, it was a calculated, deliberate murder. It all came to a head when the toxicology report came in. The cause of John's death was confirmed to be poisoning, but it wasn't just any poison. This was a rare, fast-acting chemical compound, one that required specialized knowledge to acquire. And when Olivia and Lucas connected the dots, it was clear, this wasn't something Emily could have done on her own. No, Ryan Cooper, with his background in chemistry and previous failed business ventures, was the key player in this deadly scheme. But how far had Emily gone? Was she the mastermind, or was she a victim of Ryan's manipulation? The detectives had already uncovered that Emily's motive had been financial. John had been preparing to donate a significant portion of his wealth to charity, a move that would have left Emily with almost nothing. To her, this was more than a failed marriage, it was a looming financial disaster. The couple's once thriving business was on shaky ground, and Emily had started to feel suffocated by a life she had no control over. John's wealth, his business, his influence in Cedarwood, all of it would have been out of her reach had he gone through with his plans. But if John was dead, things would change dramatically. Ryan Cooper had his own reasons for being involved. He had his eyes on the prize, Emily's inheritance. A man with nothing to lose, Ryan had been struggling financially for months. His business had failed, and he had become entangled in bad deals that threatened to ruin him. But Emily offered him a way out. With her wealth, he could start fresh. He just needed to get rid of John. He could no longer hide behind his charm and smooth talk. It was time to act. As Olivia and Lucas dug deeper into Ryan's past, they found more evidence that painted a disturbing picture. Ryan had always been a man who liked to keep his options open. A few months before John's death, Ryan had taken out a life insurance policy on Emily, one that would pay out if anything happened to her husband. That alone sent a shiver down the detective's spines. Why would he do that unless he was planning something much bigger? Emily's role in the plot was becoming clearer with every passing day. The detectives had already confirmed that she had been having an affair with Ryan for months, but as they reviewed her communications with him, they found something even more disturbing. In a series of emails and text messages exchanged between the two, Emily referred to "taking care of things" with John. The context was vague, but the implications were undeniable. She had been planning his death all along. The investigation took an even darker turn when Olivia and Lucas began reviewing the security footage from nearby buildings. A camera near the Harris residence had captured footage of Ryan entering the house late one evening, just hours before John's death. It was a key piece of evidence that placed Ryan at the scene of the crime. This footage, combined with the toxicology report, was the final blow to the theory that John's death had been from natural causes. The detectives knew they had their case. Emily and Ryan had orchestrated this murder together. Ryan, the chemist with access to rare poisons, had been the one to administer the fatal dose. But Emily, with her financial desperation, had been the one to drive the plan forward. She had everything to gain: freedom, wealth, and the chance to start a new life with Ryan. They had worked together, carefully constructing a plan to rid themselves of John and take his place at the top. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Olivia and Lucas could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on them. They had what they needed to bring Emily and Ryan to justice. But there was still one final step: the confrontation. Emily had to face the consequences of her actions. And Ryan, who had thought he could manipulate Emily and her wealth to his advantage, would soon find out that justice would catch up with him too. The confrontation took place in the interrogation room. Emily, once so composed and confident, was now a shell of the person she had been. When Olivia and Lucas confronted her with the evidence, Ryan's presence at the house, the toxicology report, the emails, she cracked. Her demeanor shifted dramatically. The woman who had once denied everything, who had insisted that she had done nothing wrong, was now desperate. She started crying, but her tears seemed more like an act than genuine sorrow. The guilt was too overwhelming to hide. Ryan, on the other hand, remained defiant. But even his bravado began to falter under the weight of the evidence. As the detectives pressed him, the cracks in his story became more and more apparent. He denied ever intending for John to die, but deep down, he knew that the walls were closing in. The game was up. He had been involved in this from the start, and there was no way to escape the truth now. As the detectives prepared to arrest both Emily and Ryan, the reality of their actions began to settle in. Cedarwood, once a quiet town full of life and trust, would never be the same. The murder of John Harris had exposed the darkness beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect family. It wasn't just a tragedy, it was a betrayal that rocked the very foundations of the community. In the end, Emily and Ryan were charged with first-degree murder. Emily, desperate to escape the life she felt trapped in, had betrayed not only her husband but her own soul. Ryan, driven by greed and the allure of Emily's wealth, had allowed his desperation to push him into a crime that would haunt him for the rest of his life. As they were led away in handcuffs, the town of Cedarwood could finally begin to heal. But for those who had known the Harris family, the memory of that night, the night when secrets were exposed, when a loving husband was lost, and when greed took over everything, would linger forever. The weight of the truth had finally come crashing down. Emily Harris and Ryan Cooper, once seen as victims of circumstance, were now facing the consequences of their own greed and betrayal. The detectives, Olivia Davis and Lucas Parker, had successfully pieced together the horrifying truth: John Harris's death had not been a random tragedy but a carefully orchestrated murder driven by financial desperation and a twisted affair. But now, the final test awaited: the interrogation. It was a cold, gray afternoon when Emily was brought in for questioning. The once confident woman, who had stood firm in her lies, now appeared defeated. Her shoulders slumped as she entered the room, and for the first time, there was no defiance in her eyes. Olivia and Lucas had spent days collecting the evidence: the emails, the phone records, the toxicology reports, and the damning video footage. All of it pointed to Emily and Ryan. The truth was inescapable. As Emily sat across from the detectives, a heavy silence filled the room. Olivia wasted no time. "We know everything, Emily. We know about the affair, the money, the plan you and Ryan put together. It's over." The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Emily looked down, her lips trembling, but she said nothing. Lucas, leaning forward, added, "You knew exactly what you were doing when you poisoned John. You were hoping to inherit everything. You and Ryan planned this from the beginning." Emily's eyes darted around the room, avoiding the direct gaze of the detectives. She could feel the walls closing in, but she still didn't speak. For a long moment, there was silence. Emily's body seemed to shrink with each passing second, as if the weight of her own guilt was beginning to suffocate her. Then, finally, her voice broke through the stillness. "I never wanted it to end like this. I thought, maybe John was better off gone. I didn't think it would hurt so much." The words came out in a strained whisper, a confession laced with regret. Olivia's face remained impassive, but inside, her heart was pounding. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Emily had admitted it, the truth was coming out, but it wasn't coming easily. There was no remorse, no real apology, only a fleeting sense of regret. But the gravity of her actions couldn't be hidden. "What did you think would happen, Emily?" Lucas asked, his voice steady but filled with the anger he was trying to suppress. "You killed your husband, the father of your children, and for what? So you could live your life with Ryan?" Emily's face flushed, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Anger and fear mixed in her gaze, a cocktail of emotions she couldn't control. "I didn't kill him for Ryan. I thought it would be easier for me. I didn't want to lose everything. I thought I could escape my life with John. I didn't think it would go this far." Her voice cracked, and for the first time in the entire investigation, Emily seemed like she was coming to terms with the horror of her actions. But Olivia wasn't done. She leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Emily's. "You didn't just kill John, Emily. You stole his life from him. You stole his children's father. And you did it for what? A future with Ryan? You didn't care what you were destroying, did you?" Emily's face contorted with a mix of anger and guilt. She opened her mouth to speak but faltered, as if the weight of her own words suffocated her. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I thought maybe, just maybe, if John was gone, I could have a chance at happiness with Ryan. I didn't think it would cost me everything." Her voice trailed off, barely above a whisper, as if she were trying to convince herself more than the detectives. But the damage was done. The plan was exposed, the lies stripped away. Ryan's role in the murder was no longer a question. Emily had already implicated him, and now it was time for him to face his reckoning. The interrogation room became even more tense as the detectives turned to Ryan. He was brought in separately, but the change in his demeanor was almost immediate. His defiance was gone. He was no longer the confident, charming man who had spent months manipulating Emily and weaving a web of lies. Now, as he sat across from Olivia and Lucas, he was nothing more than a man caught in a trap of his own making. When confronted with the evidence, Ryan broke. His facade crumbled. He tried to deny everything at first, but as the detectives laid out the damning evidence, including the life insurance policy and his presence at the scene, Ryan's excuses began to sound hollow. He was finished. The game was up. "I didn't want to kill him," Ryan stammered, but there was no conviction in his voice. I needed money. Emily told me she was going to leave him, and I thought we could be together." His voice trailed off as the full weight of his betrayal sank in. He had played the role of the helpless lover, but now it was clear, he had been just as complicit as Emily. Olivia's voice was cold, piercing as she asked, "And you thought this was the only way out? You thought killing John was the answer?" Ryan remained silent, unable to answer. The truth was too much to bear. The room grew heavy with the finality of their confessions. Both Emily and Ryan had betrayed John, and in doing so, they had condemned themselves to a life of ruin. Cedarwood would never be the same. The death of John Harris wasn't just a tragedy, it was a wake-up call for everyone who thought they knew the Harris family. As Emily and Ryan were escorted out of the interrogation room, their fate sealed, the detectives could only reflect on the magnitude of the crime. This wasn't just a murder, it was a story of greed, deception, and betrayal, one that would echo through the town for years to come. The truth had been revealed, but the emotional scars left behind would take far longer to heal. The courtroom was packed. Cedarwood, a town that had always prided itself on its tight-knit community, was now left in shock and disbelief. What had happened to the Harris family, what had started as a tragedy, was now a story of betrayal, manipulation, and the dark consequences of greed. Emily Harris and Ryan Cooper had been convicted of first-degree murder, their lives shattered forever, and the community forced to reckon with the chilling reality that even those closest to them were capable of unimaginable actions. The jury deliberated for hours, but when the verdict was read, it felt almost anticlimactic. Everyone knew it was coming. There was no question. Emily and Ryan had not just taken a life, they had destroyed everything they had once held dear. For a moment, there was nothing but silence in the courtroom, as if the entire town was holding its breath. But as the gavel came down, a collective weight seemed to fall on everyone present. This wasn't just about justice. It was about understanding the depth of the wounds that had been inflicted on the Harris family, and on the people of Cedarwood itself. Emily sat motionless in her chair as the judge pronounced her sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. She had confessed, admitted to poisoning her husband, and had been directly involved in the murder with Ryan. There was no escaping it now. Her entire life, everything she had worked for, everything she thought she could build, was reduced to ashes in that moment. But what truly broke Emily wasn't the sentence. It was the realization that she had destroyed her own family. Her children, still young, would never again see their father. The guilt of what she had done, of how she had torn apart the very foundation of their lives, would haunt her for the rest of her existence. As she was led away from the courtroom, her face a mask of numbness, Olivia and Lucas exchanged a look. They had solved the case. They had uncovered the truth. But in many ways, it felt like there was no true victory here. Emily and Ryan had destroyed so much more than John Harris's life. They had destroyed a family, a community, and the trust that once held them all together. Ryan was sentenced to 25 years to life, a lesser sentence due to his apparent role as the secondary accomplice. But just like Emily, he was crushed by the weight of his actions. There was no joy in his conviction, no sense of relief. He had been the one to administer the poison, to carry out the final act of murder. But the true horror of his situation was more than just the physical prison he would live in for the rest of his life. It was the fact that he had lost everything, his integrity, his humanity, and the woman he had betrayed his whole life for. Now, both of them were doomed to face their fate in a world far different from the one they had dreamed of. As Ryan was led out of the courtroom, his head bowed low, Olivia couldn't help but reflect on the path that had led them here. The affair. The lies. The poison. It all seemed like a twisted dream, a nightmare that they had all walked into, one step at a time. But the reality was painfully clear now. Emily and Ryan had acted out of selfishness. They had made decisions that were rooted in greed, frustration, and the belief that they were entitled to a better life, no matter the cost. And in the end, that was the root of it all, their belief that they could take whatever they wanted, without facing the consequences. But no one could escape the truth forever. And now, the truth had caught up with them. Back in Cedarwood, the town tried to pick up the pieces. The Harris family's home, once filled with laughter and warmth, was now a cold shell of what it used to be. The children, though still young, would grow up knowing the horrific truth about how their father had been taken from them. It was a future that would forever be haunted by the decisions of two people who had believed they could control their own fate. As the detectives walked out of the courthouse, they couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that had settled in their hearts. Yes, justice had been served. But at what cost? They had found the truth, but the pain left behind was immeasurable. Could any sentence truly undo the damage done? Could anything heal the emotional scars that Emily and Ryan's actions had caused? Emily had destroyed her family for the chance of a new life, a life that was now gone. Ryan had destroyed his own future for a fleeting dream of wealth and power. In the end, neither of them had gained anything. They had lost everything, and the price of their actions was far more than they had ever anticipated. As the investigation closed, Olivia and Lucas knew this case would stay with them forever. It wasn't just the murder that haunted them, it was the personal cost of betrayal, the broken trust, and the lost potential of a family destroyed by greed. They could not undo what had been done. But they could honor John Harris's memory by ensuring that the truth was told, and justice was served. Now, we turn it over to you. What do you think of Emily and Ryan's decisions? Do you believe they understood the full consequences of their actions, or were they too blinded by their desires? How do you think the children will cope with the loss of their father? Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. This story is far from over. The impact of betrayal, the cost of revenge, and the scars of greed will continue to resonate, not just in Cedarwood, but in all of us. What would you do if faced with the same choices?